It was spring break 2023. My friend Michelle and I booked a trip to Miami. For a weekend, it was both of our first times in Miami. We were both 22. We stayed at some full-house rental in Wynwood, which was like a 20-minute Uber from the beach. We got there on Thursday, and we were staying until Monday. We landed pretty late in the day. Thursday, so we just went out to some nearby bars for the first night. It was fun. The following day, we Ubered to Miami Beach to have a beach day. We brought the towels from the rental and just laid on the beach for hours. Multiple groups of guys approached us, and we just reject them or whatever. But there was one guy who approached us, I guess specifically me, that just had this really charming accent, seemingly nice forward personality, and honestly, everything about him was handsome, from his hair down to his physique. He introduced himself as Will. He asked what our plans for the night were and asked for my number, and honestly, I gave it to him. Then he was off on his way down the beach. He didn't seem to be with anyone. We watched to see if he'd stop and try to get more numbers. But he didn't. He was just walking away, looking at his phone, and eventually walked off the beach in the direction of the street. Michelle was a little jealous that he showed me more attention. I could tell later. That day, after the beach and some bars, we left Miami Beach because it was a little too crazy for us. Definitely because it was spring break, but it was just a bit much. We returned to the rental with some drinks and snacks from a nearby store. We drank in the backyard by the pool, listening to music on Michelle's speaker while we plotted our night. It was around this time I shot Will. A text asking what he was doing for the night. He responded very quickly, saying he and his friend didn't have plans yet. And then he suggested for four of us, go out by us in Wynwood. Michelle jokingly asked if the friend was cute, but I wasn't going to ask that we made a plan for Will and his friend to come pre-game with us at the rental. So they came around 8. The friend's name was Ken, and he was surprisingly good-looking as well. I could tell Michelle was pleasantly surprised. They brought their own drinks and left them on the counter in the kitchen, and we drank in the yard for like an hour. They seemed very normal. All seemed like it was going. Well, we had eventually walked to a nearby bar. It was also in Wynwood. I have to admit, Michelle and I were already drunk, and Ken and Will kept buying rounds of shots. Things became a blur pretty quickly. I wouldn't say I blacked out, but bits and pieces of my memory became foggy at that point. Eventually, Michelle and Ken went to another side of the bar, presumably to hook up. So I was alone with Will for quite some time. Eventually, I had to go to the bathroom. But before I left, I remember him calling out, "What do I want for my next drink?" I replied back, "A tequila soda." When I came back out from the bathroom, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Will was like hovering over the corner of the bar, clearly doing something sketchy. I walked a certain direction to get a better angle, and I saw he had the 2 drinks in front of him, but he was hovered over them as if he were doing something to my drink. I may have been drunk, but that was enough for my intuition to tell me to leave. I walked away without him noticing to the other side of the bar, looking for Michelle, but she and Ken were gone apparently, so I rushed out of the bar and tried calling her a bunch of times. But she never picked up around this time. Will texted me asking where I went. I ignored it. I texted Michelle a bunch of times, asking what happened, where is she? And then I eventually dropped the bomb that I think Will was trying to roofie me, and that we should get away from these guys. I started walking back to the Airbnb. This was when Michelle texted back, asking, "Why do you think he was RF in you?" And I said, because he was hovering over the drink he ordered for me, doing something to it. She texted back, maybe he was just on his phone. I tried calling her, but again she didn't pick up. She texted back instead saying, I'm still with Ken. Just text. I responded to her that I already left, so I'm not going back anyway. And I suggested she meet me at the Airbnb. She responded, I'll be back soon. So I walked back. When I got back, I let myself in with the code, locked the door, automatically locked, after like 10 seconds. Same thing with the back door. I sat really drunk, and by myself. Honestly worried about Michelle, but also, I feel like I was wondering if I was just overthinking the whole Ruthie's thing. Maybe he was just on his phone, either way. It was too late now. I was surprised that Will never attempted to text or call me again. Next thing I remember was the doorknob to the back door jiggling, and then I heard the button sound effects of the coat lock, followed by a failed attempt. Sound effect. I then got a text from Michelle saying to open the back door. I went to the back door and called Michelle's name through the door. She didn't answer though, so I tried calling her phone, but she didn't pick up. I got a text back saying, hurry, open the door, he's coming. And this was when I really started to freak out. I yelled through the door, Michelle, you're scaring me. There was no peephole or windows to look through to see if it was really her. I begged her to please answer me. She never did. There was a peephole in the front door, so I hurried to the front and looked through it. I actually felt sick at this moment, scared for my life, because I saw what looked like Will hiding to the side of the front door. A million thoughts crossed my mind, like if Michelle was running from Will, I was still too terrified to open the back door without her confirming it was her. I texted her back that I'm calling 9191 right now. She didn't respond. I actually did call 911 and explained. And while I was on the phone, I checked the peephole again, and Will was gone when police showed up. I let them in, and within 5 minutes, one of them asked if my friend was blonde, and I said yes. He then told me that another officer had her in their squad car and was bringing her here. I was so relieved, but also horrified, when she arrived in a second police car. She had been visibly crying. It was to make a police report, giving every last detail as specific. Lie as possible, they said they'd get the surveillance footage from the bar we went to. We also had to contact the Airbnb host and immediately cancel our stay and go somewhere else. It was a long, nightmarish night. Obviously, the rest of our trip was completely spoiled. It took a whole week before hearing back anything from the police. And the only reason they called was to confirm what the name, that guy that I was texting, gave me, because it didn't align with the phone records for that number, which I'd already figured out myself. He was using another stolen phone after that. I never heard from the police again, which is absolutely sickening. How little priority the police put into cases like this. Even with easy evidence, I have no interest in returning to Miami after this horrible experience. I could have honestly been... My name is Anna, my friend Lena, and I had been looking forward to spring break for weeks. We were two broke college juniors, desperate for a change of scenery, but neither of us could afford the classic trip to Mexico or Hawaii, so we were kind of restricted to somewhere in the continental, US preferably, not too far away. So when we found a cheap Airbnb near Charleston's historic district, we booked it immediately. 5 nights of food bars, and exploring it felt like exactly what we needed. Plus, it was my first spring break above the age of 21. So I wouldn't have to constantly stress about which places were likely to snatch. My fake ID, by the 3rd night, we'd settled into a routine sightseeing during the day, hopping between restaurants and bars in the evening. I'm not a heavy drinker, and neither is Lena. So we were getting more enjoyment out of just experiencing what the city had to offer early. That evening, we ended up at this tiny seafood spot we had found online. Fried shrimp, hush, pui, sweet tea. You know, that sort of vibe. The place honestly felt like a hidden gem. And I was impressed that Lena had been able to sift through all the touristy stuff to find something a bit more authentic. The good vibe didn't last, though we were halfway through our late lunch when my phone buzzed. I glanced down. It was a number I didn't recognize. The message just said, "Hey." I stared at it for a few seconds before showing Lena, asking her if she knew the number. She looked at my phone and said she didn't. I figured it was just a scam or something. But usually those scam texts say more than just, "Hey, maybe it was a wrong number." I typed back a quick "Who is this?" and went back to eating Lena. And I were laughing about something silly when another text from that same number popped up on my phone. It said, "Look outside." That one made me pause. I glanced toward the window next to our table, expecting to see someone waving or messing with me. Maybe one of my friends from school had coincidentally taken a trip to Charleston at the same time we had. But there was nothing, just the street with people walking by like normal. I told Lena someone was messing with me and she agreed, saying it was probably just a prank. I laughed, but the thought of that really creeped me out. None of my friends were really the type to do that, but I guessed it could have been some guy who had previously hit on me and was bored or something. Up until that point, the whole thing still felt harmless. But then, another message came through just a few minutes later. It said one word, Anna, that stopped me cold. If this person knew my name, it definitely wasn't a wrong number, probably not a scam either. I gasped and showed Lena, and she reminded me about something I had completely forgotten about on our first day in Charleston. Lena and I had entered one of those giveaways at a local cafe. It was one of those Winnie free meal promotions, where they asked for your name and number and a few other things. It had completely slipped my mind. But as soon as Lena brought it up, that's all I could think about. I hadn't given my number to anyone in Charleston either. So it made sense. I told Lena whoever was texting me probably had her number as well, and the two of us kind of freaked each other out. Dinner wasn't as fun after that, in all honesty. I felt too out in the open. We paid the bill and decided to shake it off at a rooftop bar across town. It was packed and seemed like the type of place that attracted a younger crowd, so it was a no-brainer. After a few drinks, I was starting to loosen up and Lena and I were enjoying ourselves again. But of course, that didn't last long. I got another message from that number, but this one was so much worse. It said, "That's a nice red jacket." I went stiff. I was wearing a red jacket, in fact. I was one of the only people there who was even wearing red. I looked around frantically, but it was useless. The place was crowded, filled with people laughing and drinking, but no one was looking at me. At least, not obviously. I showed Lena the message, and she said we should leave. The two of us started making our way back to the Airbnb as cautiously as possible. I kept glancing around behind us to make sure we weren't being followed, and we weren't. By the time we got inside, I bolted the door and double-checked every lock. We shut the curtains and locked all the windows, too, trying to convince ourselves we were just overreacting. But an hour after we got back to the Airbnb, we started getting hungry. But neither of us wanted to leave. We ordered Uber Eats instead, picking some random burger place a few blocks away. I always had my Uber Eats setting set to leave at door by default, as I had a really bad experience with a delivery driver a while back that I don't want to talk about. The estimated wait time was 50 minutes, which felt like forever. We distracted ourselves by watching some dumb reality show, trying to shake off the lingering paranoia from earlier. For a little while it worked. Eventually, there was a knock at the door. I looked down at my phone and saw a notification from Uber Eats saying the driver was arriving. I was confused, though normally Uber Eats would send a photo when the food was dropped off, so I wasn't too sure why our driver had knocked on the door. I looked at Lena and she looked equally confused. I got up and checked the peephole and yeah, it was a random bulky-looking dude in a hoodie, holding our bag of food. He just looked like a normal Uber e-driver. I watched for a few moments, expecting him to set our food down and leave, but he just stood there. After a while, he knocked on the door again and said out loud, "Uber Eats for Anna." I said thank you, and that he could just leave it out there, but he still didn't move. There was a long pause, and then he finally said, "I needed to come out and sign something real quick. That wasn't right." I exchanged a knowing glance with Lena. Something was very wrong about this. She immediately pulled out her phone and dialed 911, mouthing, "Just in case." To me, I wasn't going to argue. Looking back, speaking out loud to that guy probably wasn't a smart choice, because after that, he started knocking on the door more aggressively. He kept saying that he had other deliveries to make and that he just needed a quick signature. But I knew that was BS when I didn't respond. He started jiggling the doorknob when it didn't budge. He started banging on the door, shouting my name. I honestly thought he was going to kick the door down, and I don't think Lena and I would have been able to fend him off had he done so. But then I heard a siren in the distance and the banging on the door stopped. I heard the bag of food fall to the porch, followed by rapid footsteps running away from the house. There was quite the commotion on our yard. We heard officers yelling and sirens blaring. Lena and I rushed to one of the windows just in time to see two officers tackling that guy in the hoodie. A few houses over, we didn't dare go outside, but we watched as they put him in cuffs and escorted him to the back of one of their cars. The officers then came to our house and we told them everything, including the text I had been receiving by some miracle. One of the officers had been patrolling just 2 blocks from our Airbnb when Lena placed the call, which explained how they showed up so quickly. Thankfully, we were in a very happening area. They took our statements and told us we'd be hearing from them soon. It turned out our cafe theory was spot on. He worked there, he had taken photos of the giveaway forms, and had been following us since that afternoon. Probably because we had written down that we were just visiting for spring break. And that made us easy targets or something. The cops' running theory was that he had followed us home from the bar and waited outside our house. When the Uber Eat driver pulled up, he must have convinced him to hand over the food, maybe pretending to be my boyfriend or something. The guy also apparently had a criminal record, which made the situation even worse. We were dealing with someone with a very violent history, and that was downright terrifying. The rest of the trip kind of sucked, and when it got time to leave Charleston, I was relieved. I still don't know what that guy's plan was. Maybe he thought if we opened the door, he could push his way in and do God knows what. Either way, I try not to think about what would have happened if Lena hadn't called the police when she did, or even worse, if the police hadn't been able to get there in time.